The courthouse smelled like old paper and floor polish, the kind of place where voices instinctively lower even before anyone asks. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, pale and impersonal, catching dust in the air like it wanted to document everything. I sat in the second row, hands folded in my lap, listening to the quiet shuffle of people who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly recognizing my outline again. My name is Rachel Whitman. I'm 30 years old. I hadn't planned on seeing my parents that day. But there they were, arriving late as always, sliding into the row behind me with the confidence of people who believed history could be rewritten if enough time passed. My mother wore pearl earrings I recognized from childhood photos. My father's hand rested lightly on the back of her chair, a practiced gesture. When they saw me turn, they smiled like nothing had ever happened. They'd cut me off at 18. No call. No backup plan. Just a short conversation in a kitchen that smelled like burned toast and disappointment. My grandfather had picked me up that night in silence, his hands steady on the steering wheel, the radio off. He didn't ask questions until I was ready. He never forced reconciliation. He simply said, "You'll be okay. We'll make sure of it." I've always been the adaptable one. The one who lands on her feet because there's no guarantee someone else will catch her. The one who learns to read rooms quickly, to survive transitions quietly. I learned early how to build a life without permission. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. My parents' smiles sharpened, anticipation blooming like they'd already won something. My mother leaned forward slightly, eyes bright, the way she used to look when she spotted an opportunity. The will reading began with formalities. Dates. Definitions. Assets named in careful language that stripped them of emotion. I kept my eyes on the folder in my hands, thin, unassuming, containing a letter my grandfather had written to me months before he died. I hadn't opened it yet. I didn't need to. I knew his voice well enough. When the judge reached the estate summary, the room shifted. An estate valued at approximately $3.8 billion. He read, voice neutral, practiced. A murmur rippled through the room. My parents' posture changed instantly. My father sat taller, my mother's hand tightened on her purse. She leaned toward me and whispered, "Well, this explains a lot." I didn't respond. She smiled wider, already rearranging futures in her head. "Of course we'll manage it for you," she said softly, like she was offering to help carry groceries. "This kind of thing is overwhelming." A memory drifted in, uninvited. My mother once telling me I was too emotional to make big decisions. My father nodding along, relieved to let her take over. I felt the familiar pull to nod back to keep things smooth. I didn't. The judge continued, turning a page. The sound was crisp, final. My parents' smiles stayed in place, fixed and ready. They didn't look at me anymore. They were already imagining meetings, advisors, signatures with their names beside mine. I felt strangely calm. I thought of my grandfather's study, the smell of leather and coffee, the way he'd insisted I understand every document I signed. "Money doesn't change who people are," he'd said once. "It just removes their excuses." I've always been the adaptable one. But adaptation doesn't mean surrender. The judge cleared his throat and began reading the next section. My parents leaned back, satisfied, prepared to be addressed. My mother crossed her legs slowly, deliberately, like a queen settling into a throne she assumed was hers by default. The words hadn't landed yet. But I could feel it coming. The shift, the fracture, the moment where the past would finally stop pretending it didn't matter. I folded my hands tighter, noticing how steady they were. Outside, a siren passed distantly, life continuing without ceremony. When the judge reached the end of the page, he paused. And in that pause, everything they believed about access, entitlement, and forgiveness waited, balanced on a single turn of paper. They were still smiling. They wouldn't be for long. The judge adjusted his glasses and continued, his voice even, unhurried, as if he were reading the weather instead of redrawing a family's future. My parents leaned forward again, confidence settling into their shoulders. My mother nodded to herself, already organizing tasks she believed would soon be hers. My father clasped his hands, eyes bright with the kind of optimism that comes from expecting a reward without earning it. I've always been the adaptable one. The one who learned to stay quiet while decisions were made around her. The one who watched authority move freely and learned how to survive its shadow. The judge read about trusts first. Separate entities. Independent oversight. Long-term protections. The language was precise, layered with safeguards that sounded clinical to anyone not listening carefully. I listened closely. I'd helped review parts of this months ago, sitting across from my grandfather's attorney while he drank tea and corrected phrasing with a patient finger. My mother's smile tightened. She glanced at my father, then back at the judge, clearly waiting for the part where names would be added, where their role would be acknowledged. When that didn't happen immediately, she shifted in her seat, clearing her throat softly. The judge turned another page. All assets, he continued, are to be placed under the direction of an independent fiduciary board, appointed prior to my death. My father frowned just slightly. My mother tilted her head, the way she did when something didn't align with her expectations. Additionally, the judge read, the beneficiary retains full authority over personal, philanthropic, and business decisions, without parental or familial oversight. The word parental echoed faintly in the room. I felt it ripple behind me, my mother's breath catching, my father's posture stiffening. They exchanged a look quick and sharp. My mother's hand tightened around her purse strap, knuckles whitening. She leaned toward me again, whispering, "That's just legal language. We'll still be involved." I didn't turn my head. The judge went on, listing conditions with the same steady tone. No amendments without beneficiary consent. No access granted by birthright. No assumed roles. Each sentence closed a door my parents had already started walking through. I thought of the night they told me to pack my things at 18. The way my mother had stood by the counter, arms crossed, saying I needed to learn responsibility. The way my father had avoided my eyes. The way the house had felt suddenly too large and completely close to me. I've always been the adaptable one. But adaptation doesn't erase memory. My mother shifted again, impatience now bleeding through her composure. She raised her hand slightly as if the judge might pause for clarification. The judge did not pause. The beneficiary's parents, he continued, voice unwavering, are expressly excluded from any managerial, advisory, or discretionary role related to the estate. The room went very quiet. My father's face flushed, a dull red creeping up his neck. My mother's smile finally collapsed, replaced by disbelief so naked it looked almost childish. She straightened in her chair, lips parting as if to protest. "That can't be right," she muttered. The judge turned the page again. I felt a strange warmth spread through my chest, not vindictive, not triumphant. Settled. Like something heavy I'd been carrying had finally been placed down somewhere solid. My parents had cut me off because they believed distance would teach me obedience. They'd believed survival would drive me back into their orbit, smaller, more manageable. They hadn't anticipated my grandfather's quiet patience, his refusal to rush me into forgiveness or dependence. The judge cleared his throat once more, preparing to read the next section. My mother leaned back now, eyes darting around the room, searching for reassurance that wasn't coming. My father whispered something sharp under his breath, frustration cracking through control. I sat still, hands folded, breathing slow. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't spectacle. This was structure. The judge's finger traced the page as he read the final lines of that section, each word precise, deliberate, irreversible. I thought of my grandfather's voice again, calm and steady. Money doesn't change who people are. It just removes their excuses. When the judge reached the end of the paragraph, he paused again, longer this time. My parents didn't smile anymore. They stared straight ahead, stunned as the reality they'd never planned for settled in. And the next page, the one that followed, was going to make it impossible to pretend this was a misunderstanding. The judge let the silence sit. Not out of cruelty, out of precision. Silence has weight in rooms like this. It gives truth time to land. My mother broke first. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice cutting too sharply through the stillness. "There must be some mistake. We're her parents." The judge looked up, calm and unmoved. "Please refrain from interruptions." I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes forward, fixed on the seal behind the bench, feeling my heartbeat slow instead of spike. That surprised me. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times. Rage, tears, shaking hands. Instead there was clarity. Clean. Exact. I've always been the adaptable one. The one who learned when to brace and when to bend. This time there was nothing to bend toward. The judge turned the page. "Pursuant to Section 12, he continued, any attempt by excluded parties to influence, pressure, or extract financial benefit from the beneficiary will result in immediate legal action, including but not limited to restraining orders and forfeiture of any remaining claims. My father let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Claims, he muttered. We're not claiming anything. The judge didn't respond to him. He kept reading. The estate further establishes a permanent legal firewall preventing indirect access through loans, gifts, shell entities, or intermediaries acting on behalf of excluded parties. The words stacked up, one after another, closing routes my parents hadn't even realized they'd been counting on. I thought of all the ways control had always arrived quietly in my life. Advice framed as concern. Conditions disguised as help. Access assumed, never requested. The way money had been used not as support but as leverage. My grandfather had seen it. He'd seen it long before I'd had the language for it. I remembered sitting across from him in his study 2 years earlier, afternoon light slanting across stacks of documents. He'd slid a paper toward me and said, "Read it slowly. Not because it's complicated, but because it's permanent." I'd asked him then if he was worried about fallout. He'd smiled, faint and knowing. "I'm worried about you," he'd said. "Not them." Behind me I felt movement, chairs shifting, whispers starting and stopping. Someone cleared their throat. The air felt tight, like a storm held back by structure alone. My mother leaned toward my father, whispering urgently now. I caught fragments. "This isn't how it works. She wouldn't do this. He manipulated her." That one almost made me smile. At 18, when they cut me off, they'd said independence would build character. That struggle would make me stronger. They hadn't expected me to survive without needing to crawl back. They certainly hadn't expected my grandfather to give me the one thing they never had: autonomy without strings. I've always been the adaptable one. Adaptable doesn't mean controllable. The judge reached the final subsection and paused, as if giving the room one last chance to catch up. "Finally," he said, "the will includes a personal directive from the decedent." My parents both looked up sharply at that. The judge adjusted the papers and read. "To my granddaughter. I leave you not just wealth but protection. You were raised to doubt your instincts. This structure exists so you never have to again. Trust yourself. I always have." Something loosened in my chest then, slow and quiet. Not grief. Not relief. Recognition. My mother made a sound, small, broken, half scoff and half gasp. "He turned her against us," she said too loudly. The judge's voice sharpened for the first time. "The court will not entertain commentary on the decedent's intent." My father finally turned and looked at me directly. There was no anger in his eyes now. There was calculation. "You don't have to do this," he said, low and urgent. "We can fix this privately." I met his gaze for the first time that morning. "I didn't do this," I said calmly. "You did. Years ago." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. The judge closed the folder with finality. "The will stands as read." Just like that, it was over. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Structurally. As people began to stand, murmurs spreading through the room, my parents remained seated, frozen in a reality they hadn't prepared for. Their smiles were gone. Their certainty with them. I stayed seated a moment longer, letting the moment pass through me completely. The next part wasn't about money. It was about what happens when access is revoked, and consequences finally have room to arrive. The room emptied in slow, uneven waves. People avoided my parents' row as they passed, eyes flicking away like they'd brushed against something sharp. Papers were gathered. Doors opened and closed with soft finality. The courthouse returned to its quiet hum, as if it hadn't just witnessed the collapse of a story two people had been telling themselves for decades. My parents stayed seated. My mother stared at the judge's bench like it might offer a second version if she waited long enough. My father leaned back, jaw tight, fingers steepled in a posture I recognized from negotiations he used to win. This time there was nothing left to negotiate. I've always been the adaptable one. Adaptable enough to wait. Adaptable enough to leave. Adaptable enough to stand still when standing still finally mattered. Outside, the air smelled like rain and stone. I stepped onto the courthouse steps and felt the day settle around me. Traffic murmuring, a bus sighing as it pulled away, the ordinary sounds of a city that doesn't pause for inheritance or regret. My grandfather's attorney caught up to me, folder tucked under his arm, professionalism softening into kindness. "Everything's in motion," he said. "Take your time." I nodded. Time had never been something my parents allowed me to take. Felt different now, available, unclaimed. Behind us, the doors opened again. My parents emerged, my mother first, face composed into something brittle and performative. He said my name like it was a reminder. "We need to talk," she said. "This isn't how families handle things." I turned. Not quickly. Not slowly. Just enough to face her fully. "This is how boundaries handle things," I replied. My father stepped in, voice low. "You think this makes you safe?" I considered the question, noticing how calm I felt answering it. "Yes," I said. "It does." My mother's eyes filled, not with tears exactly, but with something close to loss. "After everything we did for you," she said. I didn't correct the sentence. I let it sit as it was, unfinished and telling. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said. And I meant it, not as forgiveness, not as invitation, but as closure. I walked away. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. No dramatic headlines. No public feuds. Just adjustments. Lawyers doing what lawyers do. Trustees setting frameworks. Advisors asking me what I wanted, then waiting for the answer instead of supplying one. I moved apartments. Not because I had to, because I could. I bought a place with windows that caught morning light and floors that held warmth. Kept my routines simple. Coffee. Long walks. Books my grandfather loved. I visited his grave once and told him thank you out loud, the words carried off by wind and leaves. I've always been the adaptable one. This time, adaptability meant choosing myself without apology. My parents tried once more. An email this time, careful and conciliatory, asking if we could reset. I replied with 3 sentences. I wished them well. I said contact would happen through counsel. I said I needed space to live the life I'd built without interference. They didn't write back. If you've ever been cut off and then welcomed back only when something valuable appeared, you know how conditional love sounds when it clears its throat. Some families don't teach independence. They test obedience. I didn't become wealthy overnight. I became protected. There's a difference. Wealth without structure invites chaos. Structure without permission creates peace. I used part of the estate to fund scholarships my grandfather had quietly supported for years. I invested patiently. I learned to say no without rehearsing it first. I stopped bracing for punishment when I asserted myself. Nothing terrible happened. The world didn't end. It widened. Sometimes I think about my parents' smiles at the will reading, how certain they were that blood equaled access. Certainty is loud when it hasn't been tested. Silence is what remains when it has. I don't hate them. I don't need to. The distance is clean. Intentional. Kind to the parts of me that learned too early how to survive without backup. What my grandfather left me wasn't just an estate. It was proof that protection can be an act of love. That autonomy can be inherited. And when the judge turned that page, something older than money finally shifted. Access ends, autonomy begins.